Hello there everyone, this is uxwbill and I'm sorry to say that yes, you have tuned in another one of my videos. For those of you who've been watching my videos for a while and perhaps even watching the calendar, then you undoubtedly know what time of the year it is and what this video is going to be about before you've even watched it. What a time saver, what a sanity saver. And it could also probably even be argued that the calendar is far more interesting and well done to watch than one of my particular videos. But if you insist, this particular video is going to be discussing my finds at the Peoria Area Amateur Radio Club's Hamfest. You might recall, if you've watched the previous videos I've made on this, specifically the one for 2016, that last year I didn't end up coming home with a whole lot of stuff. There just weren't too many things there that happened to catch my fancy. This year, however, has been quite different. I'm sure you can tell right away that the Mercury Grand Marquis is riding quite low in the back end, and there is a reason for that. First thing that I managed to find was a pair of these uninterruptible power supplies from Emerson Network Power. These are branded as Liebert PSA models. Unfortunately, it's not tremendously clear which model I actually ended up buying, because they were apparently too lazy to put the actual model number and specifications on the body of the unit itself. I think we can pretty safely say this is neither of the 1500 MT3 or the 1000 MT3, but it could be either of the 500 or the 650. My personal guess, this is probably the 500 MT3. I bought two of these for one money, $5 for both of them. That's hardly a price you can argue with. This one I just slipped a new battery in, roared right to life, and it's working just fine. Rather surprisingly, it is cold start capable, which came as something of a surprise to me, obviously. It is mentioned that these do not have a hot swappable battery, and if you read this warning label from just a moment ago, which you could see on the video, you'll notice it says something about the battery not being isolated from the AC power line. I haven't tested to see if that's actually the case, but if it is, it's frankly quite surprising, because almost any other uninterruptible power supply you can think of not only has the battery safely isolated, but it can also be changed while the unit is in operation. Although while you do that for a brief period of time, your load is going to be completely unprotected and could be dropped. Of course, when most anybody buys an uninterruptible power supply around these parts, it's practically certain to be from American Power Conversion, Schneider Electric. A few trip lights sneak in, but all these other names, you really just don't see them terribly often. So I went ahead and picked up both of these just because I was curious. Let's see what else I happened to get. I love counterbalanced deck lids on cars. Just another thing that I wish weenie modern cars had. I've really outdone myself this time. Not all of these things are mine, although most of them are. This is something that my father found. I had to put it in a bag. It's a General Electric radio receiver of some type or another. When I first caught sight of this thing, I would have told you that it was an 8-track player. But apparently, in addition to receiving the AM and FM broadcast bands, it also receives channels 1 through 4 of something else. I don't know what else that would be. If it's some sort of a cut-down police scanner, maybe you install frequency crystals inside it and tune them accordingly to what you want to receive. I really don't know. I'm sure someone will tell me all about that down in the video comments. So let's get that out of there. There's the other one of those Liebert uninterruptible power supplies. I guess I'll go ahead and pop that out of there as well. This one's still comatose because it doesn't have a new battery in it yet, but it will have soon enough. Get it right back into working order. I think these are from sometime in either 2010 or 2011. At least that's what the date codes I found on the battery I removed from this one would tend to suggest. So let's see what else is over here. I bought a whole slew of wiring devices. Most of them never opened, never used, never anything. That whole box. There's a couple more pieces over there. A couple of 220, 240 volt outlets for heavy appliances. It says non-grounding. Don't know what that really means to me, but may factor in a little bit later. Here's some more of that. convenience pack of decorator style switches. These were partially used. It's not a full box, but there's some single outlet receptacles in there for 15 and 20 amp. In other words, I could be wiring stuff until the cows came home. I'll bet there's 200 outlets in that box, if not more than that, and probably almost as many switches. So I think that was quite a good deal for the money. What else have we got in here? Got a couple of keyboards and mice. These actually came as part of some computers that we'll be looking at in just a bit. Something definitely out of the usual for my tastes and interests. This is a PV mixer amplifier for public address usage, building-wide sound distribution and reinforcement, that sort of a thing. There were 4 of these. I could have bought more than one. I gave $10 for this one. Really don't know too much about it. Whether it works or not remains a mystery. But we'll probably be finding out soon enough. And since this is intended for use with building-wide sound reinforcement systems, it has screw-style connectors on the back. A couple of the screws are missing, but I don't think that'll be a very big deal to fix. It's also capable of driving both 25 and 70 volt high voltage speaker systems, which again, something very common that you find in building-wide sound reinforcement systems. Auxiliary inputs 1 and 2. I believe this is just monophonic, which is probably why I should have bought 2 of them, so I could have a stereo building-wide sound reinforcement system. It's very, very heavy and extremely well made. I hope I don't drop it. Okay, what else have we got? More PCI video cards than you can shake a stick at. A bunch of floppy drives. All this came from one random junk pile that I found. I didn't get to keep the tote that came in. The guy who was selling them said he wanted $10 for the tote. I paid $10 for that entire stack of video cards, the floppy drives, these Linksys wireless routers. One of them's an access point, the other's a full-fledged router. This one's just wireless B, so it may be a little too old to be interesting. More floppy drives down here. Quite a few of them, in fact. And then also in that same pile of junk, an old video camera. This has a tube-style Nuvicon image sensor in it. It's a color video camera. Manufactured in November of 1984. This is a Sharp QC-54. You can read the information on it. This is made in Japan. Got a little microphone up there. The foam is actually still good on it. I didn't even notice that at first. I happened to get quite a sunburn. It was a beautiful day in a lot of ways. Hard to believe that here we are nearing the end of September. And we had an 85-90 degree day the other day. You can't really see it on my arms now. Well, it shows up more on the camera than it does in real life. At least if it survives the video compression and encoding process. I think I'm about to get run over by the keykeeper. But in any case, I got a fair case of sunburn. It's a surprising thing to be reporting on in September, isn't it? I have raccoon face right now, and I also have a red neck as well. Continuing our tour of the goodies I picked up, we have an unusual thing here. This is called a PC air conditioner. It's the best way to cool a PC. Probably a complete and utter lie. I would imagine this thing does approximately nothing. It also cost approximately nothing. I gave $1 for this. So even if it's completely useless, I can hang it on the wall and look at it and have people ask me questions about what it happens to be. Somewhat surprisingly, it doesn't appear to actually take power off of the computer's expansion bus. It looks like it actually has power connection lead for that, and apparently it's for an older computer than I thought, because it shows a 16-bit ISA slot into which it would be plugged. I'm rather surprised they'd have you plug it into an expansion slot, since it appears to have no use for one, other than to occupy it. There's that. This is a solar panel. And amazingly enough, I don't think I've managed to break it on the way home. It's marked $10. I paid $5 because here on the back it actually says bad. But I can tell you that at least as far as open circuit voltage is concerned, this thing seemed to perform perfectly well. I'll put a load on it a little bit later. Probably not going to get to that today for obvious reasons. But I'll put a load on it a little bit later, attach it to a solar charge controller, and see what it actually does. I was told by the gentleman that I bought this from that it was originally used to power some sort of a traffic signal or a street sign, or probably one of those blinking lights that warns people at crosswalks. I see a lot of solar panels on those as of late. And he said that they preemptively replace these every couple of years as the output drops. There's the information about the manufacturer. I apologize for it being upside down. There's kind of a junction box on the back of it here. I'll have to figure out what all the wires are. My guess is that this might actually be two smaller panels connected in series or parallel with one another. You choose the wiring based on however you happen to set it up for whatever your charge controller calls for. Another one of those non-grounding outlets. And then two things, and I apologize to anyone who loves the Pentium 4 and similar family of NetBurst microprocessors for what I'm about to say, but the truth of the matter is, any computer with even a very fast Pentium 4 in it these days is just plain worthless. I shouldn't have paid any money for them at all, but I was so curious about these. As you can see, they're BTX Optiplex systems, but if you look at the model number, it says it's a GX280. Now where I come from, the GX280 is one of the so-called ugly plexes, or the last of the ATX style Optiplex systems that were sold in a clamshell case similar to their dimension grade, home grade counterparts. But apparently Dell saw a reason to invest the time, trouble, and engineering effort to retool the Optiplex GX280 into a BTX chassis system, and I have no idea why they would have done so. I haven't seen any of these before. These were actually at the Hamfest last year, and I passed one up because they wanted $40 for it. No way, no how. I'm not giving that much. But the same man who had these last year was there again. He still had these. I paid $20 for the both of them. And while we're talking of things that are worthless, here again I expect I'm going to attract certain members of a fan club when I say this. But the truth of the matter is, these things, they're white elephants. There's just no two ways about it. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the computer itself wasn't so bad. It's just that Apple never managed to deliver an operating system that could do everything this hardware was capable of. This is a single processor Power Macintosh G5. I offered $10 for it. My offer was accepted. It's the low-end model because it just has a single microprocessor in it. 1 GB of RAM installed from the factory. And there you can see the single processor. I really thought this board had provisions to add the second microprocessor in the future if you were feeling particularly flush, but looks like there are just solder pads for the connection. Has been upgraded a little bit, has 2 hard drives in it instead of just one. They're obviously older drives, probably bridged parallel ATA designs, because they both have a legacy power connector on them. There's the optical drive, one of the memory modules. I think the dual processor versions of these also have more memory slots on the motherboard, and I think I'm right about that, because if you look, you'll see that there are solder pads unpopulated for additional memory modules. So kind of limited, but maybe still somewhat entertaining to play around with. I guess before I put this aside, I'll zoom in on the informational label so you can read all about the specifications that this model would have had. It says Mac OS X, which of course is a given for these. Mac OS 9 never ran natively on the G5s, it only ran in the classic environment. And although I think there were some efforts to get it running natively, I don't think any of them ever amounted to anything. But there you have it, a Power Macintosh G5. I don't know what attracted me to this. I already have one of these, although it's not in very good shape. It's the dual processor. Both of them are air-cooled, this one and the one I had previously. I may let the previous one go, I'm not sure. It needs a lot of love. But I asked the guy who had the Power Mac G5 if he'd throw in a little extra. He had a bin full of random cables there. So I have a Compaq LTE 5000 series power brick, very handy because I still have one of those. And of course here we have a Dell ADP70EB PA6 family. This works with a lot of their late 90s and early 2000s laptops, and it looks to be in basically impeccable condition. But like I say, the thing I'm really looking forward to getting out of here and puttering around with are these two repackaged BTX versions of the Optiplex GX280. They look good internally. They're a little rough on the outside, got some paint spatter on them and things like that. But they don't have any bloated capacitors, which has got to be some kind of a miracle. There's the specifications on the first one. One of them has a dedicated video card in it. That's the other one, not this one. And here's the specifications of the other one. Again, upside down, but hey, in this modern world, I think you can probably deal with that. You'll notice they both have unusual amounts of random access memory installed in them. I think I will probably give them an upgrade because I have enough of those sticks sitting around to whatever their maximum actually happens to be. So let's get these out of here and just have a tinker with them. Alright, kind of a little entertaining sidebar here, at least that's the theory. Since I'm getting ready to play with a Pentium 4, why don't we go ahead and try to make our efforts just as green as possible. This is actually my little solar energy lash up right here. It's pretty rough looking right now because I'm in the process of doing a major clean out of the garage. I had a lot of projects build up in here over the past couple of months, and now it's time to sort through them and get them all cleaned up. Of course, the solar panels aren't actually outside doing anything right now because my mother was going to cut the grass and run the weed trimmer, and of course those aren't really good things to do when you have fragile glass solar panels sitting around. But for everybody who likes smoke tests, we may be in fact about to have one here. It did, to my surprise, manage to start this Dell CRT monitor. My little inverter did. Even handled the degaussing coil okay, which definitely came as a bit of a surprise. But I have a feeling, since that's a 400 watt peak inverter and probably a little light on the specifications, probably a little over-specified, that we may run into trouble with this and have an unexpected shutdown or something similar. I'm also somewhat surprised to see that the light on this isn't flickering or illuminating solidly. You might remember when I was talking about this chest freezer that I had a theory I was working with that perhaps distortions induced on the power line by those fluorescent lights were causing this tired old neon to flicker back to life. And a lot of people disagreed with me on that, and I'm certainly not saying that they're wrong in any way, shape, or form, because I really don't know enough about this. But they said that the light in the room was actually what was stimulating the neon tube to come back to life. But you'll notice that the lights are here on here in the garage right now, and it didn't take much to seemingly stimulate this tired old neon back to life, but it hasn't actually illuminated or flickered. So maybe their theory and my theory are both incorrect. I don't know. So what we're going to try for here, I don't know that this will actually work. I have to unbend the prongs on my power cord. So we'll just plug this in. We'll turn it on. I haven't seen any smoke yet, so let's turn the monitor on. I wouldn't be surprised if that inverter is doing a little bit of soft starting, because you'll notice it took that monitor a while to actually kick on, and from line power it would fire up almost instantly. This computer, I didn't even see the slightest sign of life out of it, but there we go. Looks like the video adapter's add-in BIOS is signing on. I see there's what looks like an additional... That's a different fault LED sequence. Dell later changed the numbers, but this still says A, B, C, and D. That sure is hanging around at that screen for a long period of time. Maybe this isn't the good idea that I thought it was. Now there's certainly something you won't see every day, the Intel Integrated Graphics BIOS sign-on message. Until about a year ago, I wasn't even aware that their graphics BIOS actually had a sign-on message. Yes, I went ahead and pulled the video card. I thought we'd get a little bit further. but it doesn't seem like this one's going to start up. And who knows, I could be making it enormously unhappy running from inverter power, especially with an inverter that size, but I suspect there's something else going on here that's making this system unhappy. I'll just have to simplify the configuration because right now I don't have any way to look up the meaning of the Dell fault codes, and as hard as it may seem to believe, I don't actually have all of them memorized. Alright, well the good news is that didn't take any amount of time to figure out at all. I strongly suspicioned it was the optical drive on the system's lone parallel ATA channel, and sure enough, as soon as I took that out of the picture, everything was in happy land, just coasting along once again. There we have the Dell BIOS sign-on screen, and of course the setup utility. It probably doesn't really show up on the camera very well, but I think that this monitor's filter capacitors are not really sufficient to deal with a modified sine input waveform. Let's see what we've actually got in here. Unfortunately, I don't think these Optiplex GX280 models support anything really good in the Pentium 4 processor matrix. It's my understanding that they only support single-core microprocessors, and whether that's a chipset limitation or an artificial limitation imposed by Dell's BIOSes, I really couldn't tell you for sure. But to my amazement, the date is correct, the time is not so much. We'll fix that a little bit later. They do have an internal disk drive. Ooh, a Maxtor serial ATA drive. Now that's a rare beast, especially one that still works. Alright, go ahead and turn off the parallel ATA drive. I always turn on smart reporting. It may come too little too late, but it certainly shows willing. Can't hurt, it's free, I mean. Alright. And I'll be perfectly content with the onboard video. Set the hard drive acoustic mode to its maximum level of performance. That's another thing I'm curious about. The BIOS is way out of date on this, 4 revisions. So I'll have to update that at some point. Turn that off. I don't need that. The only person who's breaking into my computers around here is me. The event log doesn't show too much. Of course, just how far back in time it really goes, I couldn't honestly tell you because someone has definitely replaced the CMOS timekeeping battery. In fact, while we're in here, why don't we just take a look at what this motherboard has on it. It's certainly a departure from things like the GX520 and 620 series motherboards. You can see an artifact for something over here, maybe onboard firewire. There's the low pin count I/O controller. That little wire loop above it is part of the intrusion detection switch. I'd love to know what the great secret is with the low pin I/O controllers, the low pin count I/O controllers on all the later BTX Dell systems, the BTX Dimensions, the BTX Optiplexes. This appears to be pretty much an off-the-shelf part. I could probably look that up and get a data sheet for it. The later ones are made by same company, Standard Microsystems Corporation, but for some reason Dell has their data sheets locked up under some sort of an NDA or something, and I've asked Standard Microsystems about it. They couldn't even tell me what the part did. They asked me if I happen to know. Of course, there's the south bridge for the chipset installed at an angle. Artifacts for 2 serial ATA ports. The GX620 series Optiplex actually populates all 4 serial ATA ports. Obviously, whoever engineered that board had the foresight to think that, hey, someday somebody might only be able to get serial ATA optical drives to install in one of these systems. There's that hard drive. There's the standby power LED on the motherboard just beaming away. It's every bit as bright as it looks. And apparently there's some sort of a cobweb in there. I'll definitely blow the dust out of these. But for now, suffice it to say, I'm certainly surprised that the system doesn't have any major complaints, like lack of a time and date being properly set. Let's see if it'll actually boot into anything. If it'll actually start up into an operating system. It's thinking about it. Oh, there we go, Linux Mint. Let's just see if we get any details on the screen there. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. I don't know if that's a bug or brokenness in the distribution in its later releases. Although this is definitely not a terribly recent one. And I'll certainly flush the operating system off of these computers and install a fresh copy before I do anything else. Because I have no idea what might all be present in this distribution as it was installed on these computers. It's not exactly quick though. This has to be the hokiest mouse in the entirety of the free world. Take a look at where the cable comes out and just how thin it is. They call that a pocket mouse. I guess the cables, you're supposed to be able to bundle that up in here. It's kind of a clever idea, but it just seems kind of fragile and cheaply made. Speaking of input devices, if you want to use real ones, you definitely can with this BTX Optiplex as well as many others, because right there is the socket connector for the optional second serial port and PS2 mouse and keyboard breakout that these machines supported all the way up until the very end of the BTX line with the Optiplex 780. Okay, well this one doesn't seem very happy either. The front panel cooling fans just racing. We're stalled at the Intel Integrated Graphics BIOS sign-on screen. Let's just see if we can fix it. I have no idea why that fan would be racing so like that. Some of these allowed for user control of the fan speed, but I don't think that happened until much later in the Optiplex line, almost to the end of the BTX era. So let's just disconnect the optical drive, try it again, and I'll bet it's a lot happier. Already that racing fan is gone, but we're still locked up at the Video BIOS sign-on screen. It figures the one time I think it'd be a slam dunk, it wouldn't be. And it's really not worth putting any amount of time into these. Where is that power button? Yeah, maybe this one doesn't work. I'll fiddle around with this later. I'm almost out of memory card space, and there's more stuff that I want to talk about, including what I think was probably the best find of this year's Hamfest. Well, it's been a few weeks since the last installment of my Hamfest stuff video. It's now early October 2017. I've been very, very busy. I just haven't had the time to get around to messing around with any more of that stuff. But I'm back, thanks to the magic of video editing. I'm back almost instantaneously, in fact. And I can tell you about a few things I have worked with. First of all, I went ahead and cabled up that solar panel. You can see it has a very high-tech mounting system there that I'm surprised is still standing upright after as much rain as we've had. I think the only thing in the world that was wrong with that solar panel was a miswiring. In fact, I have noticed that it puts out about 1.7 amps worth of electrical current at about 13.1 volts under load, maybe a little higher than that, because like I say, the sun was wandering around. This actually began as a beautiful, if very windy day. It's still very windy, but the sun has gone away, and now apparently the rain has taken its place. And while it seems odd to say that we're having a summer shower here in October, that's definitely what it is. It has dropped the temperature down considerably, though. It was 82 degrees out here earlier. Now I'm going to take a guess that it's probably in the upper 60s somewhere. Other things that I had time to fiddle around with, yes, I kept messing around with those Optiplex GX280s, even though they absolutely were not worth investing any further time or money into. Well, I didn't invest any money into them, just time. I got both of them working, and it turns out the trouble with those had to do with the parallel ATA channel. I don't know what it is about the BTX Optiplex and Dimension series machines, but I have certainly noticed that they can get touchy with regard to their parallel ATA channel. If everything's not absolutely right with it, they will have a fit. And with the second of the two machines, not only did I have to and replug the CD-ROM drive to convince it that I meant business, I also had to and replug the motherboard-facing connector as well. The world's really analog. I guess some corrosion or something built up on the pins and just kept it from communicating appropriately. But with those optiplexes out of the way and the fact that I'm kind of tired of fiddling with them, they'll probably turn into some kind of an operating system test bed for software that I'm curious about but don't want to install on an important computer. I'm sure some of you are wondering when I'll get around to tinkering with this Power Macintosh G5. Well, your wait is finally over. Let's go ahead and haul this thing out and get it set up. Of course, before someone continues with the second part of this video epic, they should make sure that the refreshments are in order. Well, much to my amazement, this flat panel display actually seems to work. It displayed a little Dell Genesis Display Perfection sign-on screen when I plugged it in. Not sure what particular indignity happened to it. Not really thrilled about that, though. So we're all plugged in and ready to go. I actually have a new inverter that we're going to be stress testing here because my long-serving and really quite reliable and well-made 200-watt inverter recently gave up the ghost, so I went to Wally World and found this Never Start 400-watt model. I've spent much of the afternoon stress testing it with various and sundry difficult loads, and so far it's passed with flying colors. But let's see if it can handle a Power Macintosh G5. Okay, power light came on, briefly. Maybe it can't quite do this. Yeah, that seems to be all that's happening. Of course, the parameter memory battery could be dead in this thing. We'll try it from AC line power before I give up on it, though. Focus. Come on, Handycam, you can do it. This thing focused a lot better when it was new. It's probably getting ready to break. Okay, we'll chalk that one up for the record books. Apparently a Power Macintosh G5's power supply doesn't really care for modified sine wave inverters, or was overloading this one, which I rather seriously doubt. I know that active power factor correction power supplies, with which these units are definitely equipped, can get uppity about oddball incoming power waveforms, but usually that's only a factor when you have an uninterruptible power supply and the characteristics of the output waveform change when the utility power disappears. And then of course you get a sudden shutdown because the active power factor correction controller chip can't handle the change and thinks that something has gone seriously wrong. So this thing did boot up, and it booted up quite quickly. Of course, right now the only input device I have at my disposal is a keyboard, and that's really not very helpful when you're using a Macintosh because so much of it is mouse driven. And in fact, my keyboard will not be usable until I identify it. So let me find a USB mouse, and I'll be a good boy and identify my keyboard, and we'll be right back yet again thanks to the magic of video editing. Okay, I went and found a USB mouse. I actually had one in the trunk of the Mercury that went with one of the optiplexes. And right away, I can see that the previous owner of this computer did at least make some cursory step to remove all the data from the machine, which is good because I really didn't want to have to deal with that. Let's just see what we get here when we choose about this Mac. Looks like we're running Mac OS 10.4.11, 1.6 gigahertz PowerPC G5, still 1 gigabyte of DDR SD RAM. Let's see what other information we can extract from the system here with the system profiler. I believe that the boot hard drive in this actually has been upgraded to a 250 gigabyte model. Here's some information about the machine family to which it belongs. There's a DVD-ROM. I wonder if that means that this thing doesn't have any disk burning capability. Now that's interesting because I would have thought that all of these at a minimum shipped with a combo drive, and that a super drive would have been optional. A combo drive in Apple parlance being a drive that reads DVDs and burns CDs, and a super drive can burn every optical disc format, of course. Here's the audio built-in hardware. Does this have Bluetooth? Seemingly not. How about an airport card? Wow, we didn't even get one of those. This apparently was a bare bones model. So what else have we got in here? Serial ATA. There should be some stuff under there. Looks like it's just a 200 gigabyte hard drive, so okay. If it's a 200 gigabyte hard drive, how can there be 227.46 gigabytes available? Ah, there's actually two upgraded hard drives. So the original hard drive, whatever happened to it, it's long gone. I don't know where it is. But that's definitely a nice touch. I have a little added hardware. A little hardware upgrade. I'll definitely want to find some more memory for this thing. Let's see if I can get the display resolution turned up a little bit, because right now it's set pretty low. 724 by 768 at 60 Hertz ought to work nicely. And indeed it does. Before I really get into doing any sort of in-depth work with this Power Macintosh G5 computer system, I do want to install a fresh copy of the Mac OS, one that's under my control, one that I know what's there and what isn't, where it began, all that sort of thing. But before I do that, I figure it wouldn't hurt to experiment with it a little bit. After all, it's at least nominally safer than just plugging an unknown Windows computer into your network. Not perfectly safe, but at least a little bit safer. So I've gone ahead and opened up Safari here, and I don't know how recent of a version this is, if it's the version that comes with Tiger or if it's been upgraded along the way. I actually do have Apple Software Update running in the background, but if there is a newer release of Safari available for this platform, it hasn't been made available. But in any event, I've opened up Safari and I headed over to Cameron Kaiser's Flood Gap Systems. If you don't know that name, amongst many other things, he is the maintainer of the 10.4 Fox browser, which is a fork, or a port even, of the Mozilla Firefox browser. It's maintained in a relatively contemporary fashion so that users of PowerPC Macintoshes actually have an updated browser. And as far as I know, on the Mac OS at least, it stands alone as being the only updated browser available. And I'm kind of surprised that the website for it, as you can probably see, is really kind of broken. It's not so broken as to be unusable, but this is a difficult problem. It happens with Macintosh, PCs, Windows, any operating system you'd care to name. When it gets to be far enough out of date and you want to download an updated web browser, you can have something of a chicken and egg problem. How do you manage to, well, bootstrap's the word I'm going to use, though it's probably not the most appropriate selection of verbiage. It's that clumsy phrasing, isn't it? But when you need to get a workable web browser in place, it can be very difficult if you don't have another computer running contemporary software that's actually supported. Although it does appear that SourceForge is at least going to work. We'll see. I am eternally optimistic here, and that's a lot of my problem. But it's counting down, it's going through all the motions. Security certificate error. But it looks like we're actually going to get the download, and then we'll have a contemporary browser on this machine that we can work with. I'm very curious as to how well this will actually perform, because my PowerPC Mac Mini that I bought new back in 2004 or 5, I think it was. I think it was 2005. It's a 1.25 gigahertz G4, upgraded substantially. It's the base model with Wi-Fi, Bluetooth. Both of those were added, but I think it's only got a combo drive. It's of no particular import here, but one of these days I'd like to find the stealth refresh model of the G4 Mac Mini, the one that shipped with a 1.5 gigahertz microprocessor and a slightly upgraded GPU. I think it just had more memory more than anything else over the regular one. But like I say, that's neither here nor there. But the sad fact of the matter is, software that isn't optimized for your CPU can just absolutely murder your system's performance. And even though 10.4 Fox has some optimizations, I don't know where Windows keep going on this thing. Although it does have some optimizations, the modern web is just unusably slow on that machine. It's running Tiger as well, I've never seen the need to take it up to 10.5 because my experiences with macOS 10.5, they have not been good on PowerPC hardware. But I may change my perspective on that, at least as far as the G5 is concerned, just because the G5, at least in theory, has so much raw CPU horsepower to burn, in a certain sense anyway, that maybe it would run well with macOS Leopard instead of Tiger on it. Plus that might open up avenues for things like the Leopard WebKit port, which is a port of Safari's underpinnings, the more recent versions of it, to older macOS platforms. So wow, that kind of got off on a bit of a tangent there, but I'm very curious how usable the modern web will be on this machine compared to my G4. I don't expect it to be a rocket by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm going to know here in about 30 more seconds. And I'm kind of contemplating just keeping the camcorder rolling here, though I will have to restart after installing all of these software updates. So I'll probably just stop that and we'll come back when I've got everything back in place. So it turns out that there is a significantly newer release of Safari available for this platform. Can you tell I don't really use my Power Macintoshes a lot anymore? It's kind of a sad commentary. Speaking of sad commentaries, take a look at that. Wow. I mean, I appreciate Mr. Kaiser's efforts in keeping a contemporary browser available for the Power Macintosh platform. That is, of course, absolutely awesome. And I know he's done a lot of work to try and speed it up and optimize it for the Power Macintosh, but I still just find it almost unbelievably, unusably slow, and I'm a fairly patient person at that. Even if I get pretty heavy-handed with things like AdBlock Plus or uBlock Origin, NoScript, anything I can do to just try and slim things down, but look at how long that's taking. The GX280s were no rockets, but they were definitely running rings around this thing. And that's just a really sad commentary. Of course, this thing does need a RAM upgrade. I would imagine that if I went into the utilities folder and I punched up the activity monitor, that what I would probably find is that this poor thing is just gasping for memory. Well, not as badly as I would have thought. There's about 270 megabytes worth of memory available, roughly speaking. So it's not exactly to the point where it would be beating itself to death with swapping or paging. But it just goes to show you how some of these older machines, they just really haven't aged very gracefully. And I apologize if that offends someone, because it's absolutely not my intention to do so. I like older computer hardware. I have a lot of respect for it, but certain things, they just haven't aged very well. And unfortunately, I think the Power Macintosh G5 is definitely one of them. Let's see if the optical drive will open up. Hey, look at that, it does. Always love that little trapdoor that goes open and shut. Now, I don't know if there's... I shouldn't need Flash Player, but I'll tell you what we're going to do now. We're going to go to YouTube's best channel. And you know how I know that's true? I read it on the internet. That's how I know it's true, because everything you read on the internet is true. And just see how long it takes for this thing to do that. And we'll see if we can actually watch one of the Keykeeper's videos. Turn the volume up so you might be able to hear it. Someone should really be bothering the Keykeeper about making more videos. We have audio, but the video is just a slideshow. That's pretty sad, really. Yeah, I think if I try to keep this up, I'm probably going to lose control of the browser. Yeah, the window's gone. But there, the Keykeeper was still talking. Oh yeah, that's pretty tragic. It really is. I wish this wasn't the way things were. I'll try getting a little bit heavy-handed with this, install things like NoScript, and we'll see how much of a performance boost that happens to bring. So thus far in my adventures with Power Macintosh G5 Science, I've made the situation sound like it's pretty dire. And in certain ways it is, but there are many things that can be done to improve performance of various and sundry things. One of the things that you can do with regards to playing video on the major sites like YouTube and Vimeo, you can use an extension within Firefox known as the Quicktime Enabler. And when you install this extension and configure it, you have the option to open a video externally in, you guessed it, QuickTime Player. You get a message confirming that the video you chose is going to be opened. I'm not sure if there's a way to turn that off. I would like to do so if it was possible, but I don't see any options to configure the extension. So you say OK, and in a moment or two the QuickTime Player comes up, and as you can see the result is enormously smoother. Here's the keykeeper talking about the soap spill, which his cats had absolutely nothing to do with. The soap bottle actually ended up vibrating off the dryer, and when it hit the when it fell off, the cap hit the floor and shattered. The container itself, I believe, was still good because it's made of a much softer plastic. But as you can see, the video plays quite well, and if it weren't for the fact that Apple has apparently never bothered to fix the extremely low video recording volume on iPhones. This was shot with an iPhone 7. The latest and greatest iPhone 7. I think it's even the top of the line model of the iPhone 7, but you still have to practically yell into it to be heard, especially if you don't have particularly great speakers in your playback environment, as I don't right now. So you can do that to improve performance. The other thing that I've done, as previously mentioned, I set up NoScript, which blocks almost all the JavaScript on the web today from executing, and I consider that almost to be a necessity. And then the final thing I've done, I've never liked YouTube's autoplay. It just makes me absolutely crazy. I wish there was a good way to turn it off, and there are some browser extensions that will do this. But if you use Firefox, as is right and proper, despite the Mozilla organization's best laid plans at trying to utterly ruin the browser, you have another option that's very simple and very effective. If you go into the About Config area of the browser, and you search for the string autoplay, you'll find a value called media.autoplay.enabled. This governs video and audio formats that the browser can actually play natively, such as MP3, H.264, WebM. It doesn't help you for Flash videos. You'll still have to use some kind of a blocker for that, or just don't install the Flash plugin. But if you toggle this value to false, suddenly YouTube becomes a whole lot more pleasant. However, this does carry with it some potential for unfortunate side effects. It can break certain websites. That's actually a double-edged sword in and of itself as well. The double-edged swords, it's turtles all the way down. That's what it is. Because sometimes it actually breaks advertising on the web. So annoying video ads won't play. So yeah, it's not the fastest thing, but with a little bit of patience and some tolerance, you can certainly get through it. I think I've done all the playing around with this thing on video that I want to do. Probably all the playing around I want to do for a while. So I'm actually going to put it all back together, and then I'm going to share with you what I think was probably the best find at this year's Hamfest. Before I get to that though, there is one thing I'm curious about, and some of you might happen to be as well, so we're just going to get this on video. Just going to throw it in. Here's one of these little Emerson Liebert uninterruptible power supplies. Just like the inverter I was trying to use a while ago to power this up, this too has a modified sine wave output, which is to say it's a square wave with periodic drops to zero level before the waveform reverses direction and heads the other way. I didn't think that these Power Macintosh G5s were sticklers about the input waveform of the power source to which they were attached, but maybe they are. So what we're going to do, we're just going to click this over to battery, force the UPS to go to battery, and we'll see if the result's a sudden power off. Yep, sure is. So apparently the Power Macintosh G5 cannot handle a modified sine wave input. Learn something new every day. It should be fine the moment I power it back up. Yep, see, it comes up just like nothing ever happened. If that isn't the darndest thing. See, there's the boot manager screen once again. So here it is at long last, folks. Yes, I've saved the best for almost the very last portion of this video. This is an American power conversion, Smart UPS 2200. This is the last revision of the 3rd generation series of Smart UPS. APC changed the color of the cabinet to black. They also changed the direction in which the inverter's cooling fan blows, and the final change that they made was to make the fan run at low speed continually, which I think was probably a very good idea, especially since older versions of these are known to burn out their electrolytic capacitors after a while. In order to plug this in, I had to haul out an adapter I made a long time ago. This is something that I'm sure will get the YouTube electricians and fire brigade up in arms, but it's just fine for quick tests of these things, because when there's very little load attached to one of these, you're not going to overload a 15 amp branch circuit anyhow. The best part of this whole thing is the fact that it works fine. It came with serviceable batteries. The batteries that are in here are replacements from the Interstate brand. They actually date from 2013 if the codes on them have been interpreted correctly. It's in pretty good shape. It's got some scuffs and scratches on it along the way, but no serious dents. And none of that matters because it works perfectly well. Even though those batteries are not brand new, they certainly are capable of taking a good charge. And they're strong enough, as we'll soon see, because for a demonstration I've hauled out my world famous, oft imitated but never duplicated furnace fan, multi-speed furnace fan. That being a very highly inductive load, it's a real chore for most inverters to start that. Many of them won't even try, much less run it. But this thing, of course, manages to do perfectly well. So we'll go ahead and turn it on, and provided I left all the switches in the direction that I think I did, the fan should start up as soon as the relays inside this thing close, and then moments later the inverter will kick in for a self-test. And since we were talking about modified sine wave inverters just a moment ago and how much trouble they cause for these power Macintoshes, this is one of the many possible solutions to that problem, because this bad boy has a true sine wave inverter, just like the NCR UPS that I talked about last year, and in some cases the output waveform from this is actually better than that of my utility power at times. So let's go ahead and turn it on. Fan starts up. On battery. As you can see, the fan is still going strong. And the batteries aren't the strongest, but it did manage. I'll turn that off so you might actually be able to hear me. It did manage to pass the self-test. I've actually wanted one of these later 3rd generation Smart UPS units for a very long time, and now I finally have one with pretty serviceable batteries to boot, so that's pretty awesome. Alright, there's one more thing I want to talk about before I draw this video to a close. We're going to have a set change before I can do that, though. Actually, you know what? Let's just go ahead and try this full steam ahead on the highest possible speed. And yes, that red switch was hard to find, but it's totally necessary. I think you'll agree. There again, you see, it definitely passed its self-test. They had this thing marked $60 initially, and while it took some hemming and hawing, I ended up buying it for $20. That's a heck of a deal any way you cut it. So let's go ahead and try out this video camera. Now, to the old hands that are watching this channel and this particular video, all of this is going to look very familiar to you, and of course is going to require no explanation, or very little. But for some of the younger members of the audience, what you're looking at may seem a bit unfamiliar here. The earliest electronic video cameras, such as this one, were actually a two-piece affair. You had the camera itself, and then you attached it to a VCR of some sort, be it VHS, Beta, U-matic, something else. Doesn't really matter. As far as I know, these connections are universal in nature. They provide for power, video exchange, audio exchange, and even in some cases, control of the recording VCR. So I have a VCR here that was actually given to me by a fellow YouTuber who can identify himself if he chooses to do so. This was given to me a couple of years ago along with a camcorder. I've set the camcorder aside and actually hooked up the little sharp here, and we'll see what we get. You look through the viewfinder, and I think it's just a coaxial viewfinder. That is to say, it's not a little CRT, certainly not an LCD panel or anything along those lines. It's just a pathway through the optics of the camcorder. And then we'll head over here to my video switch monitor. We'll switch over to the input where this camcorder is actually attached. And yeah, it's a little bit out of focus. And there's certainly some blurring, as is characteristic of an image sensing tube. But I would say that this little camcorder, well, not a camcorder, but a video camera, works pretty well. It's very hard for me not to move both items at once, the camcorder that I'm holding in my hand and the camera that I'm holding in the other hand. So that definitely seems to work. I'm hoping that all of you in the viewing audience can forgive me something of a postscript to what is already a very long video. I know that there are many of you out in the viewing audience who enjoy my videos. The longer they are, the better. And I think you can probably tell which demographic I was catering to with this one. I actually wanted to talk a little bit more about these little Emerson Liebert PSA model uninterruptible power supplies. First of all, from the corrections and amplifications department, there is in fact a model number on these. I don't know how it escaped me. Sometimes my brain is just in another time zone. And I realized it was there when I was actually editing earlier portions of this video together. I could see it clearly on the camera. I have no idea why it didn't register. But it turns out these are actually the 500 volt amp variation of this particular UPS. I went ahead and played around with one of these attached to a computer. They respond as nothing more than a USB human interface device class battery, which is very nice to see because there are some Eaton uninterruptible power supplies that apparently don't respond in a standard manner and require you to use their management and monitoring software or something that understands the protocol that it speaks, like network UPS tools or something along those lines. I'm very glad to see that's not the case here, because the software that Emerson Network Power provides for these is pretty hokey. It doesn't really let you do very much. You certainly can't do anything like adjusting voltage transfer points or turning the built-in alarm beeper on and off. So as you can probably imagine, both of these are going to undergo the delicate operation known as a beeperectomy. However, I did discover that these uninterruptible power supplies have a very nice feature that is not often seen in a budget-oriented low-end model such as these. The American Power Conversion plug strips are probably the closest analog to this Emerson Liebert model. And anytime the power goes wrong, they have no choice but to go to their battery. You move up a little in the APC product matrix, and you'll find that they have automatic voltage regulation capability, but it's only in the boosting direction. That is to say, when the line voltage goes low, they can bring it up, but if the line voltage goes high, they have to switch over to their battery. I'm very pleased to see that these can actually adjust both ways, and that's what I've set up to demonstrate here. I have my variable auto transformer right here. This is commonly known by its trade name, a Variac, although this is a Chinese knockoff. And then I have two meters here. The blue colored one is attached directly to the output of the variable transformer, and the red one is attached to the output of the uninterruptible power supply. And another thing that's attached to the output of the uninterruptible power supply, because I'm sure some of you are wondering why there's been a lamp sitting here for most of this video, well, this is exactly why. And I'm sure you might have just heard a UPS beep in the background. I find that more than a little ironic, since the wind has died down. Why would the power start screwing up now? Usually it goes out. Usually it goes out when the wind kicks up. But apparently today is opposites day or something. So let's have our little demonstration here. I'll start turning down the line voltage. And as you can see, both meters will track with one another up to a point. The light bulb also gets a little bit dimmer. But then you'll hear a relay click. And you'll see the brightness of the light bulb changes. This thing has not gone to battery. It contains an auto transformer of its own, and it just switched in a winding with a relay. Just switched in a winding by way of a relay to boost the low line voltage. We're sitting at about 97 volts coming out of the auto transformer. We have about 111 coming out of the UPS. If we drop it much lower than that, there it went to battery. So that's boosting. Now it's just passing voltage through. As you can see, both meters read approximately the same thing. Now we'll start cranking the voltage up here. That light bulb gets pretty bright. Then there's another relay click, and a different winding within this thing's auto transformer is switched in. You can see we have high line voltage over here, 133 volts AC and 115.4 volts AC coming out of the UPS. And if I keep going, if I keep pushing it, it'll compensate for as long as it can, and then it'll give up and switch to battery. And that's a capability practically unheard of in a budget-oriented UPS such as this, and it's very nice to see that. I know it's a nerdy thing about which few people would ever care, but I always tell people when they ask me, buy the best uninterruptible power supply you can afford, and what's more, buy something with enough capacity that it's not always running right up against its limit. Because when it runs right up against its limit, it's beating the battery to death, it's beating the inverter to death. Time gets even with the batteries, and what ends up happening is a unit that could just barely make it long enough to save all your work and let you shut down the computer. In 3 years it only lasts half as long as it used to, and suddenly it's not long enough anymore. And if you spend a little more money, you get some very tangible benefits, like the ability to adjust for low or high line voltage, such as might occur during a spike or a brownout even. I'm not sure spike is really the correct term for that, but it doesn't matter. You get what I'm saying. Either you have a surge over a long duration, or you have a brownout of some kind. This thing can sit here all day long and boost up a low line voltage or buck down a high line voltage to meet the requirements without ever having to use up its battery, and that capability is certainly worthwhile. So those are all of my finds from the 2017 Hamfest. As always, I would certainly like to thank you for watching, especially if you made it this far. I really do appreciate it, and I look forward to hearing your constructive commentary down in the comments area.